Welcome back, everybody. We are going to discuss how to use semicolons next. Now that you know how to use colons, semicolons should be fairly straightforward. So the semicolon is the dot comma combination, and they can also be used to join two complete thoughts. There are two primary uses for semicolons. So yeah, the first one is to join two complete thoughts, kind of like colons. However, there are a couple of differences. In this case, both sides, so both clauses that you're joining, have to be able to stand on their own. They have to be independent or complete thoughts. So you can't join an independent clause with a semicolon, a conjunction, and a dependent clause. That would not work. The two parts tend to have equal weight, so you don't typically have one side that is the dominant clause that then requires the second clause to finish it. They tend to be fairly equal. The connection's a little bit less necessary, but you can still join those two thoughts. So again, both sides relate, but they can relate a little less directly than with a colon. Oops. For example, you could say, it was below zero, semicolon, Jack wondered if he would freeze to death. So we have two complete thoughts joined together. They can both stand on their own. One doesn't absolutely require the existence of the other, but the first one does kind of lead into the second, hence the use of the semicolon. Another example would be, the first graders made a mess, semicolon. There was paint all over the walls and furniture. In this case, I think a colon would be fine too, because the first part does directly lead into the second part. The second part is an explanation of what that mess looked like. So either a semicolon or a colon would work because it's two independent clauses. So that's the easy one. That is joining two independent clauses with semicolons. However, semicolons can also be used to clarify complex lists. And this was the very first example I gave you at the start of this unit. In this case, a complex list is one that contains a list within a bigger list. Or maybe you have a list of things and each item in your list is a lengthy description. In that case, commas might not be enough to really clarify what's happening, and you might need a semicolon to help clarify. A complex list could also be one in which a lot of detail is shared for each listed item. Again, for example, they have everything that they needed, or they had everything they needed to go outside, colon. So I have a complete thought followed by a colon, and then now I'm going to have a list after it. I'm going to break this down a little bit. We talked about how colons can be used to join two independent clauses, or they can be used to join an independent clause with a dependent clause or list. So in this case, that's what's happening. We're joining an independent clause with a list of things. And then that list is just going to get complicated, hence the use of semicolons. Okay, I'll read this again. They had everything they needed to go outside, colon. Red, purple, and green coats, semicolon, mittens with and without fingers, semicolon, plaid, black and white scarves, semicolon, and short, medium, and tall boots. This is kind of extensive, but I think it gets the point across where you have miniature lists within our bigger list. So red, comma, purple, comma, and green coats, semicolon. If we took out all of the semicolons and just threw commas in there, you'd get the gist of it, but it would be visually confusing, and it might cause the reader to stop and trip up and have to reread a little bit. When we use these semicolons, it's like a stronger, bigger comma to help distinguish between those complex parts of the list. I'll get you another couple of examples here that you've already seen. So we're going to go back to this section from MLK in his letter to Birmingham jail. You saw this earlier, but I went ahead and highlighted the different punctuation marks that we do see in here. And so what we have is essentially just a list. It's not even a complete thought colon list. It's just a list of entries. But this list of entries contains items that have a pretty significant explanation to them. So this one right here is 6 lines long, but it is a single entry in that list. You could use commas, but the semicolon helps to clarify a little bit more and add a little bit more emphasis. The semicolon is also kind of nice because it adds a little bit more of a pause to it, which is how it emphasizes, right? So if you have something really large like this, semicolons are not necessary. You could use commas, but the semicolons are going to force the audience to pause a little bit more and help establish that beat again for effect, like we talked about previously. This is the very first thing I showed you at the start of the unit that I said, I want you to be able to write like this. Let's go through it again now that you hopefully understand it. According to the writers at communicationtheory.org, there are 7 properties of identity, comma. So we have independent clause, colon, not comma, and then we have a list. A vowel and description, semicolon, modes of expression, semicolon, individual, relational, and communal identity, semicolon, enduring and changing aspects of identity, semicolon, content and relationship levels, semicolon, and salience or prominence. It is a complete thought with a colon and then a complex list. Many of the items in that list are either lists of other things or an explanation, so the semicolon becomes necessary to help clarify. Again, with these examples, you could separate this into multiple sentences, and you could separate this into multiple sentences, and even this one, any of those would be perfectly fine. However, in this case and this case, it's actually shorter and simpler to write it as a single sentence than it would be to separate them. Rushy's deciding to come say hi this morning. Okay. So it is a useful tool as a writer, not just to add emphasis and be creative, but to help clarify at times. Before you finish your notes, I would really love you to try it out. So pretend like you're writing about a hobby of yours. And I'd like you to write an independent clause in which you explain that you're getting ready for an activity in that hobby. If it's a game, a match, a tournament, a car building session, what have you, whatever it is. Your first clause should be an independent clause in which you're explaining that you're getting ready for it. And then I'd like you to use a colon to attach that independent clause to a list. We're going to make this a complex list. So you're going to list a bunch of different things or lists within lists or explanations, and I'd like you to use semicolons to join those. So really, I'm having you write this, or even better, I'm going to have you write our scarf example, but for a hobby of yours. Please give that a shot, and if you have any questions or you're just not sure, or even if you're just like, hey, Rachel, I want you to come double check this for me, I would be happy to. But please try to write this out. In the past, when I've taught this lesson, this last activity is where people are really tested. And this is probably the best opportunity for good discussions and learning. So please try it out and let me know if you need some help. All right. Thank you.